Hello. Today, within the series of the shrinking democratic space, we will be talking about LGBTI plus rights. We have two very valuable speakers, Karolina Gierdal and Aylime Aslı Demir. Karolina Gierdal is from Poland. I hope that I'm pronouncing the names correctly. We will hear Karolina pronounce it much better, of course. The KPH, she's from the KPH, she's the general coordinator of this NGO. And Aylime Aslı Demir, who is the editor of Kaos Q+, and coordinator. We have two activists. Karolina Gierdal is a lawyer who's a member of the Warsaw Bar Association, and she is a Human Rights Center member of the District Bar Council. Since 2017, she has been with a legal firm which extends legal support to survivors of discrimination. And she also is working with the KPH, which is an NGO fighting against homophobia. She first engaged with their legal unit, then became coordinator of the legal unit. She will be explaining to us very interesting things in English. She defends very strategic court cases at the Constitutional Court of Poland and the European Court of Human Rights. She also is engaged with the hate atlas against the municipalities that call themselves the LGBT-free zones. As for Aylime Aslı Demir, she studied public administration and political science and then women's studies later. Since 2010, she's been organizing many exhibitions and publications reflecting politics and aesthetics of many different practices and ideas. She is an editor and a curator. Since 2013, she has been with an NGO which is very important in Turkey, the Kaos GL, which is the Gay and Lesbian Cultural Studies and Solidarity Association. She is also the editor of a very important publication, Kaos Q+, which is the first and only refereed queer journal in Turkey. And since February 2020, she has been a director of the guest artist house of the Ankara Queer Arts Program. This, of course, is a very valuable position, and this is one of the good developments of 2020, which is not a very easy year. We thank both our guests for being with us today. Poland and Turkey are countries which are very similar at this moment because we suffer populist governments in both countries. Now, these governments really target LGBTI plus persons. They will explain to us what these governments are doing at this moment. This has become a political question that these governments are using and they're trying to narrow the space of this area. What do you think on this question? What kind of impact did populist governments have on this space in these countries? Would you start? Let's start with Karolina Gierdal. Would you please explain to us what has happened in this space in Poland?
Thank you. Hello. Thank you so much for the invitation and also for this welcome. Well, when it comes to Poland, it has been a very big change in Poland since general elections in 2015, because in 2015, the current governing party won their first election. Before that, we could hope for a slow but steady change, moving towards granting LGBTI rights and protection. However, since 2015, we see the diminishing public space. We see the rule of law crisis. Right now, not to get into details, but right now we do not really have an independent judiciary, and especially no independent constitutional court. The tribunal, the constitutional tribunal, is actually politically controlled and will rule in any way that the government wishes it to do. The judges now are appointed by an unconstitutional body and are susceptible to political control and influence. So since then, we have seen a steady decline in protection. In 2018, we have seen the first ban LGBT marches in Lublin, in one of the cities. But I would say the first turning point in political space in Poland would be signing the Warsaw Declaration by Warsaw President Trzaskowski. This declaration was never implemented, but it received an enormous backlash. We have seen since then answers from many municipalities and other local governments when they declared their cities or counties LGBT-free zones. They are not calling them LGBT-free zones, they are calling LGBT ideology-free zones. However, I believe that you probably understand that this word ideology doesn't mean anything other than LGBT people. We have also the other type of declarations passed in the local governments, and this is the Charter for Family Rights, which was created and is lobbied in all of the municipalities by right-wing organization Ordo Iuris. All of those municipalities, all of those local government are depicted in a map, an interactive map that is called Atlas of Hate. The turning point, the second turning point, I would say, would be campaign elections. We have seen since the election to the European Parliament that LGBT people started to be used as a scapegoat, and the hateful rhetoric and diminishing language about LGBT people was first introduced. This is the time where the idea of this LGBT ideology thing is introduced, and the politicians speaking that they are not against LGBT people, but against LGBT ideology. This ideology, how they explain it, for them, they see it as a threat to family and traditional Polish values. LGBT people are depicted as foreign agents. In every election since then, and we had two elections to the parliament and for the president, the LGBT people were used as a scapegoat, and where there was an enormous hateful rhetoric. Where you could hear politicians saying things like LGBT ideology, the LGBT are not people, it is ideology. You could hear priests from Catholic Church saying that we are now facing a rainbow pest, and various others hateful rhetoric that I am not even able to say right now. What we also see is a legal harassment of human rights defenders. The Atlas of Hate that I have mentioned earlier, the authors of this atlas are now sued by some of the local governments who claim that putting them in the atlas defames them, and they want the authors to apologize and also to pay them compensatory damages. I believe that you have probably heard about Margot and Stop Nonsense initiative. These are the activists who are doing very controversial, I believe, things, but ones that I openly say that they are okay. They have been active when it comes to the trucks, because on Polish streets you can see a lot of trucks that are driving because of one of the NGOs, the right-wing NGO, with tilts that says that link somehow being LGBT to being a pedophile. And they are supposed to depict LGBT people as pedophiles and as a threat to the children. So Margot and Stop Nonsense were actively involved in fighting with those trucks. And after what they did, mainly devastating the truck and pushing the driver during one of the accidents, they were stopped by the police and taken into custody. This were completely disproportional actions, confirmed now by the court. No justification in the nature of the assumed crimes. And the next turning point, I believe, right now would be the night of the 7th August of 2020, when a judge granted an arrest warrant against Margot, and it provided for 2 months detention, pretrial detention for Margot. And people were protesting on the street, and after that, there happened arrests. The police started to arrest people that were protesting, that not even took actively part in the gatherings, that were just watching the incident or were not even there, who were just coming out of a shop, for example. They have arrested 48 people and taken them into custody, many brutally attacked and pacified. I would say that a lot of the testimonies that we had from the lawyers and the people detained point to a disproportionate response by the police, and most of them were charged with Article 254. It means that they actively participated in an illegal gathering. And when I say gathering, I don't mean a peaceful assembly. It is the special word that means that this was more of a mob thing, like people gathering without any cause, without any idea, and without any reason to protest. So I would say that this is like this political context that I wanted to start before talking about how this rhetoric is used. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. Well, this really reminds us of Turkey. But in Turkey, perhaps, LGBTI plus questions. Well, when there is, for instance, a declaration on the part of the Directorate of Religious Affairs, there is a discussion. But with respect to the use this has been put in politics, this is just a question that is continuing. What kind of chronology in Turkey? How did this space narrow down, Aylime? First of all, I would like to thank you for this invitation. Well, there are differences, but then there are structural similarities. This is a very good method to discover those similarities. And of course, we will see what the differences are. Let me talk about these common aspects and the importance of populism being on the rise globally, and its impact on the LGBTI plus question, and what is peculiar to Turkey. Well, the dates also are similar. Of course, we are talking about the rise of populism in the late 2000s with the start of the Syrian war. But then, with respect to Turkey, the attacks on the LGBTI plus, uh, that movement had obtained certain spaces in public, but the attacks started in 2014, 2015. If I start like this, perhaps I would be able to explain what I'm trying to say. Well, Turkey, Poland, and their charismatic leaders are constantly talked about, but then we see many common points. But then these charismatic leaders have supporters. There's something common there. So we can call them, these people, uh, those who are against the democracy. There is a very clear homophobia and misogyny in these people. In institutions formed around these leaders and the functioning of these institutions, perhaps there is also a commonality. Perhaps we can read what is happening to LGBTI from this point of view. This is a kind of organized hate. There is also a hate against national and international NGOs, against conventions, against trade unions, and against political parties which are not on their side, and also even the party of the leader sometimes. The, the most important factors that strengthened the LGBTI movement is that in the last quarter of a century, this movement became institutionalized. For this to be possible, one needs financial resources, of course. And these are obtained from international organizations. Or there is also the binding aspect of international conventions. When we think about these, the assault really is both on the associations. Well, it could also be university clubs, etc., and also an attack on their resources, financial resources. Now, this general atmosphere, of course, did not start in 2015. There is an earlier aspect here, started in 2008. But I think in 2015, this was a milestone, probably, a turning point. Probably not only for the LGBTI plus movement, but also to many social movements in Turkey. After the 2015 elections, when there were massacres in the period after the elections, when the AKP government lost the elections, there was a parallel attack on activists in the LGBTI movement. The massacre was against the youth movement that solidarized with the Kurds. And so it became almost impossible to organize assemblies and marches. And then there were threats to the Kaos GL Association. After these threats were shared on social media, we, of course, put forth our grievances to the police and the judiciary. Well, we don't have enough personnel, so take care of yourselves. pay attention. Well, of course, when you are paying attention, well, this is really ruthless, pitiless. I mean, to ask for people to take care of themselves when there is a threat, such a threat. So for 6 months, we were not able to work. After that, there was the coup initiative, the failed coup initiative. And after the coup, as you know, there was a state of emergency where the whole democratic space shrank very much. Especially for Ankara, one important decision in the November of 2017, on the 16th and the 17th, the queer events that were organized were banned on the basis of the rationale that there was a possibility of a provocation. And from then on, the LGBT movement had all its events banned. Well, this decision, because it was an unlimited kind of prohibition, it was very comprehensive. And then, when you look at what is being banned, theater activities, cinema, educationals, etc., all kinds of activities were banned. So everything could be brought in. The rationale of this is the protection of general health and general morality and the protections of others' freedoms and social sensitivities. There's nothing documented. This is simply a kind of intelligence which is not documented at all. For 3 years now, we have not been able to carry out activities. Well, so we closed into ourselves. We are trying to overcome this. After 2017, this has been our life. Well, we are going through difficult times anyway, but when we look at the LGBTI rights, that has been going on for a long time. How did the coronavirus process have an impact on you? When we look at the rights of the LGBTI+, has it narrowed down even further, or have you been able to find methods to broaden the rights? The recent months, how have you gone through these months? And of course, the states have been using this problem as an excuse to control private life and to make it more, the repression more marked. How did this have an impact on you, and how do you see the future? Karolina, let's start with you again.
Thank you. I do believe that COVID has an enormous impact on us. Well, I could start with the fact that it has an impact on us as an activists, because we are not able to work together. So we are all the time online and online meetings, and this is not the same thing. This is not the same thing that you can plan your activities or your actions when you are only meeting online. And I think it's taking a lot of great toll also on our psychological state of mind. Not being able to be close and to help each other, and also facilitate all the problems and processes. When it comes to our work, I believe that it's been very constraining as people limit their social and physical interactions. it's also more difficult because equality marches, pride marches are not taking place right now. And this was one of those events that were used, especially in 2019, as a tool to show other citizens of Poland that LGBT people exist, that they live in various parts of Poland and only in big cities. And this was the only time for LGBT people that they felt that they could be themselves and could celebrate being themselves. But we are trying to get the most when it comes to digital communication and technologies. We saw online marches, even if they were not as visible as the physical ones, of course. Storms on Twitter, for example, massive attacks against something or somebody who said something homophobic, because this is actually our daily life right now, that we almost every day we see or hear some politician or some activist or some right-wing media or some Polish Catholic Church officials say something homophobic. So the storms on Twitter against them. We can see also the growing interest of media writing about LGBT topics. We see celebrity support online. We see rainbow editions of many products of companies, for example, clothing companies who are designing a rainbow edition of their clothes and giving us some of the money, for example. People are also creating petitions on their own, for example, against recently chosen Ministry of Education, Przemysław Czarnek. He's known for his homophobia. He's the person that said that LGBT people are not people, and that they are not, and that we should stop talking about human rights when it comes to LGBT people. When he, in Polish language, you don't really have to say LGBT people. So he doesn't say this in this very confusing way. He only says that we have to stop thinking about LGBT are people, and we should stop talking about any human rights when it comes to them. We have also seen many webinars and workshops that take place, and people attending them. So gathering knowledge and exchanging the experience. We see people showing the support offline. Right now, especially after the events at 7th August, a lot of people are putting rainbow flags in their balconies and windows. And the rainbow flag is visible, for example, now during the women's strikes that we have currently against the decision of so-called Constitutional Tribunal banning abortion in Poland. So people come to media with rainbow elements and badges or ribbons on their clothes to show support. So when it comes to the government actions, I would just have to say that everything that now our government right now is doing to limit our freedoms is doing illegally, because they are not doing it in a way that the Polish constitution says that they should do it. They are doing it based on their directions, not based on the law. So this is a very complicated topic. Many people in Poland just respect the rules of not gathering or not doing marches or anything, just because they are afraid of getting COVID, not because these bans are actually enforceable. Thank you.
Thank you, Karolina. Now let's turn to Aylime. What was the experience in Turkey? Did the spaces narrow under the coronavirus, or perhaps was there some creative work done? How do you see the situation? Thank you. Well, frankly speaking, the COVID-19 process caused discussions within the within the society because of the statement by the Director of Religious Affairs, Ali Erbash. Then there are other aspects as well. Well, we are all convinced that COVID-19 is experienced by vulnerable groups much more strongly. And of course, the LGBT are, of course, one of these groups. If there are people within the audience who would like to look into this question in more detail, there is even a piece of research done by young LGBT people. It's a whole report on the situation of the LGBT in the coronavirus process, both in the sphere of health and also mental health, etc. But perhaps, grosso modo, one can say the following. In health or mental health or shelter, we can perhaps summarize the problems faced by the LGBT in the following manner. Well, the slogan, you remember, was that life can be lived in the home. And there were, of course, prohibitions of going out on the streets, curfews. So people were kept in the home. But when we think that for an homosexual or a trans who has not opened up to their family, life in the home is not secure. So it's not a matter of a question of affection. So the hetero world is not really sensitive to problems of LGBTI people. Then, of course, there is the increase of the practice of violence on women, domestic violence. The same happened to the LGBTI people. Well, in the study that I talked about, carried out by the LGBT youth, it is documented that 30% of LGBTI people were subjected to violence in this period because they lost their jobs, they had to stay home, and so they were attacked. Each Thursday, we use the word lesbian with an asterisk here. This is open to all women. Every Thursday, we created people coming together, and women from other geographies around the world participated. This was an online event. From different age groups, from different professions. For many people who had lost their comfort at the university, for instance, so this was a loss for them. For people working at the university, for instance, they were much more comfortable as an LGBTI person. On the other hand, some really had to pretend that they're heterosexual in their workplaces, so they had really been spared this. So there were different situations. So in this process, between March and June, those people, those psychologists who are specialized in the problems of LGBTI people, their consultations rose by 90%. On the 23rd of April, the Director of Religious Affairs, which is an institution in Turkey that rules over all religious affairs, said that these kinds of diseases are the result of the LGBTI practices. The bar associations of Ankara and Diyarbakır protested, and the president and many names, important names from the AKP, the ruling party, supported the director of religious affairs. They said the director really concerned, well, what the director said concerns only the people of faith, the people who are true believers. This has nothing to do with the constitution, etc. But this is not true. This really means to say that the LGBT are totally outside of the people of faith. They're totally independent of this world. If 99%, and this is the claim that conservative people make in Turkey, if 99% of this society is composed of Muslims, these people live with their families who are supposed to be, Muslim. And they themselves may be, at times, Muslim people. They are. And so this, presentation of LGBTI plus people as sick people is really very serious. Well, we looked into this doing a bit of research. There was the Osman character in one of the series on Netflix. And then the statement came. This turned into a whole debate on the Istanbul Convention. And after the statements by the bar associations, the whole thing became a very prominent question. So this process, up until now, the Istanbul Convention was not on the agenda that much, or the threats supposedly presented by the Istanbul Convention. But this pandemic of COVID-19 created this hate speech. There were 100 pieces of news reports presented in this period on LGBTI, most of them, of course, hate speech. And then, on the other hand, there was a kind of conflict between bar associations and the government. So the government used this as a kind of proof, evidence that the bar associations were themselves very problematic institutions. That was the whole context. Well, since we came to the Istanbul Convention, that's another common point between Poland and Turkey. In both countries, it has now become a problematic international convention. This is a very interesting example of the commonalities between Poland and Turkey. Up until now, there were conservative women and women from more secular sectors came together with other people nearer the feminist movement. Perhaps they didn't act together, but they acted in parallel fashion. Now, the final recent decision given by the Constitutional Court of Poland caused the same kind of coalitions, it seems. If there's anything you want to say on the question of the Istanbul Convention, please talk about that, Karolina. And in general, from the point of view of Poland and Turkey, together with the Istanbul Convention, There is the whole question of abortion in Poland, the whole question, the movement against abortion. Shall we start with Aylime, perhaps, this time? Okay, we will start with Aylime first. Let me say the following. As you know, Turkey is the country that was the first signatory of this convention. In 2011, this was signed, and in 2012, it was ratified. When we look at the situation at that time, the Prime Minister was Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and he was very, very upbeat on the Istanbul Convention. And in the text that presents the reason for the ratification, no, for the signing, a whole mention was made praising Turkey's role in preparing this convention. So, putting forth the pride of the government in preparing the ground for the Istanbul Convention. This changed gradually by phases. In the whole debate, I find the following important. What happened? Well, Turkey was proud of the Istanbul Convention at the beginning. And patriarchy was even mentioned in the Grand National Assembly, the parliament that is. And the prevention of domestic violence was made a big thing. And positive action would have been taken with respect to the employment of women, etc., etc. The first debate started with the question of alimony. Men do not want to pay alimony when they're getting divorced, but on the other hand, the Istanbul Convention, there was the argument that the Istanbul Convention was the basis for the increase of violence against women. Well, this is not expressed by the ordinary citizens, but ombudspersons or spokespersons for conservative women, etc. So it started with alimony, and then there was the question of alimony, and then there was the question of the Istanbul Convention increasing violence against women. And in 2020, there was the question of the LGBTI ideology that was part of the Istanbul question. Male justice. The speaker is hesitating. I'm sorry, says the speaker, I'm confused. It's difficult to speak to oneself. I only see myself here. Oh, it's better now because I can see you. It was only myself at that point. So I can come to the following as a final point. Well, it brought out different groups and caused a kind of togetherness of these groups. Only Article 4 of the Istanbul Convention says that in the activities of prevention, there would be no discrimination with respect to many things, but also gender. So this became an excuse for the conservative voices in Turkey. I think there is a similarity with Poland here. I don't know what our guest will say. Up until 2015, in Turkey in general, this whole debate there was no anti-gender debate in Turkey. There was no such thing. I mean, there's anti-gender attitude. But in Central and Eastern Europe, this was very widespread. And the question was always the LGBT people and queers. But in Turkey, the question was taken up with respect to child abuse, etc. So it was the conservative sectors. So we never came up against an anti-gender discourse. But in 2020, with the rise of the movement against the Istanbul Convention, now it's become the only thing that is being discussed. The opposition is now based on gender. They are going to spread the LGBTI ideology, etc. This is the kind of thing. So in Poland, I think this started much earlier, not in 2020. For us, this is new. Unfortunately, it is now our lot too. Thank you, Aylime. What do you say, Karolina? This anti-gender attitude. The question of sexual identity becoming a major problem. We see this in Hungary as well. All the gender studies programs now became a problem, and it was excluded in certain institutions from the curriculum. Both the Istanbul Convention and the anti-abortion movement, the constitutional course anti-abortion step, and the unifying effect of this on the movement.
Okay, so I believe in Poland we have just the whole package of it. Just as you said, it has started earlier in Poland with basically anti-gender movement and talking about gender seen as something that could be subject to cultural environment. So this concept was attacked and is being under attack for several years now. And I believe what is happening in Poland right now when it comes to LGBTI rights and anti-LGBT rhetoric, that this is all connected and is also a part of anti-gender movement. Like, it is a logical conclusion of this current rhetoric, like the traditional family, the traditional roles of men and women. For the government officials, this is the only form of family that they accept, and everything else is a threat to this kind of families. And as convention provides the definition of gender and states that the roles that we assign to women and men are subject to cultural environment, that this concept, the right wing sees it as dangerous. Why? I don't know, but somehow they do. And it is tightly connected to LGBTI rights. If gender is something that can be constructed by a culture, if it is something that you as an individual can create for yourself, if being born as a man or a woman does not mean that you necessarily respect the traditional roles assigned to you, you are seen as a threat by the conservatives to this nation and to this tradition. And LGBTI people cross the boundaries by just being themselves. Non-binary, trans people, intersex people show us the illusions of biological sex and our classifications of it, and gays, lesbians, bis, love people of the same sex or gender, and therefore they are also not respecting the tradition. And when you have heard the rhetoric from a few years ago about gender, it was all about gender basically and about women's rights, I believe. But now it became like this anti-gender movement switched to LGBTI rights. And now the LGBT people are seen as a threat, as being something that is opposed to family values, as a rainbow pest, as I said earlier. we have seen in Poland the newspapers, one of the newspapers that has printed actually stickers that said LGBT-free zone, and that was sued to the court for it. But unfortunately in Poland we don't really have in criminal code hate speech or hate crimes based on sexual orientation or gender identity banned. So actually this kind of things that you say, hate speech against Polish LGBT people, is maybe not legal, but is not penalized in any way. So so those people that are currently involved in this movement are able to say all of those things without any repercussions from the state. They can say it and not be punished for it. They can say it because the law does not specifically say that it is illegal. So this ideology discourse also became a very big, as a big help for them. They can say whatever they want because they are just criticizing the ideology, not people. The ideology that says that we are against traditional families, according to them, and therefore we want to destroy those Polish families. And in that way, they somehow see it as a threat to Polish nationality, the Polish state, and to Polish values. Basically, we are a plague. And this is, for me, it is all connected. And when you see, for example, now this massive protests against the abortion ban, because our constitutional tribunal has just issued something that you can call a judgment, but you probably won't, because the people that passed this judgment are not really judges. But it's very complicated. It calls to the Polish crisis of rule of law. However, this massive movement, it also involves queer people, and there are a lot of LGBT people protesting alongside women. The protests are kind of inclusive because a lot of people are saying that we are not protesting against the ban of abortion for women, but for a ban of abortion to people who can get pregnant. So it is becoming more inclusive that way. And also my association that I work for, Campaign Against Homophobia, is actively involved in protests. And also I am one of the people that is currently involved in providing legal help to all the people that are harassed by the police or stopped by the police. So we are actively involved, and I see it as a mission of mine and as a mission of KPH, my association, to actually be involved directly in the protests. What will happen with the protests, I don't know. Today at 6 p.m. of Polish time, I believe it's 8 p.m. of your time, there will be another big, massive protests. And I hope right now the government has this tactic that they try not to escalate. Only 35 people were detained since the September 22nd. And I hope that they will not change their tactic and not try to hold massive arrests. But we don't really know. And we don't really know what will happen next. If they are going to let this ban exist or not, if they are going to pass some other resolution, we really don't know what is going to happen with the abortion in Poland right now.
Well, what we have talked about up until here really shows how similar the two countries are. Well, there is solidarity at the national level, but what do you say about the international arena? Is there sufficient solidarity between the activists? Should there be more solidarity? What kind of methods can be adopted? İzleme, you said something in recent weeks. If populist leaders can learn so much from each other, we activists, can we not learn more from each other? Of course, you said it in a different manner, but this is what you said. But this thing about learning from each other and solidarity international at the international level, can we listen to you? Aylime first, Karolina later. Well, this inspiration from each other, this learning from each other, I think it's important. And these right-wing populist leaders really advance learning from each other. But one has to add the following. There is such an uncertainty in the near future. We don't know what's going to happen. Are we going to lose our jobs? Are we going to get ill? And, will the virus affect us? So we really turn into ourselves and we try to generate individual solutions. We close up in our homes and we practice self-censorship. So, of course, the local solidarity is very good, but so is international solidarity. So this increases our capacity to respond to the uncertainty. In the recent period, for instance, the European Lesbian Conference, I'm part of that now, and in that process of the pandemic, activists really feel a lot of need for certain things. This is what the solidarity here organizes. Not a recipe, but small funds and creating resource funds for certain localities, for certain nations. And the problems of Muslim societies were attended to. So these are not the types of support that we are used to in the past, but if there is a submission from the Philippines, the whole service is catered to that kind of need. If it's from Mersin, a city in Turkey, then the local conditions are taken into conditions. So I think an idea developed by a certain national movement in a certain national context about the pandemic can be an inspiration to other geographies. There are also aspects that are peculiar to each national context. So in this process, I think transnational organizations are very important. What can we do? For many organizations, this process also brought in a very serious financial crisis. So funds are very important here. To sum up, let me say the following. States are now withdrawing from this process of globalization. If we speculate, perhaps it will work for us when they withdraw. They believe that it's over now. Climate activists had always told us the following. The borders that you set up will not protect you when faced with the climate crisis, because this will be a global crisis. Now, perhaps this is tied to the climate crisis, but we saw this with COVID-19. Our fate really is tied to each other, and so we need to act together. The vulnerability of bodies and all the fragilities and the vulnerabilities are tied to each other. So international solidarity is very important. We should think about the potentials with podcasts and Zoom meetings, perhaps small meetings or large. We could open up all the geographies to each other. We have been trying to do this, but I hope that we can learn from each other. Perhaps we can continue on this path. Thank you. Karolina, there is, of course, the factor of the European Union in Polish life. The institutions of the European Union, well, with respect to the international solidarity that we've been discussing, and then, of course, there is the strategic cases that you take to the European Court of Human Rights. When we're talking about the international dimension, could you also talk about that? But in general, could you please talk about international solidarity? What do you experience? What can be experienced in the future?
Thanks. Yeah, as you pointed out, yes, we are the member of the European Union, and that gives us a lot of strength that I believe is very crucial right now. As an association, as a part of the community, we don't really have any support from national institutions. So the role and the impact from the EU and other international institutions is becoming, I would say, crucial. And as a result, actually, our advocacy strategies and activities have been growing on the international level, and we give it more attention and hope. And we are looking for the allies abroad. You have probably heard that recently EU Commission has presented its first ever strategy on LGBTIQ rights, equality in the EU. It wouldn't have happened without the advocacy and work of various Polish NGOs and foreign NGOs and MPs who are also our allies and some other solidarity activists. It is a strong signal that LGBT rights, in the perspective from EU countries, are the human rights, and respecting them is essential to be a member of European Union. Unfortunately, the strategy, it will be very hard to implement because most of the things that are in the strategy requires unanimous votes. So Poland or Hungary will probably veto most of the things that are written in the strategy. We were also afraid that if some municipalities of Poland or Poland as a whole will lose money because of, for example, something that is discussed right now on the European Union level is a mechanism that ties EU budget with rule of law, basically. So we were very much afraid. We have a lot of questions about it. Are we going to advocate for this mechanism? We were afraid that the government will then use LGBT people again as a scapegoat and say, yeah, we have lost money from the European Union because of LGBT rights. And they are going to talk more and more about so-called LGBT ideology and everything. And they are going just to blame LGBT people for losing money. It is not happening right now. And we have seen that on the local level, some of the local governments that have lost money because they have passed, for example, those anti-LGBT resolutions, they have lost money from the European Union, and they are actually trying to, some of the local governments are trying to change those resolutions and annul them. So we now believe that maybe money is the only thing that can make the government step back or change their policy. We are also advocating to start the infringement procedure against so-called LGBT-free zones in Poland under Article 7 of the Treaty of the European Union. So basically, we have a lot of allies in EU institutions, and we have a lot of strategic advocacy work going on there. And as well, as you have pointed out, we are also using some tools of strategic litigation in the European courts, especially the European Courts of Human Rights. We have now more than 15 cases, I believe, pending that regard strictly LGBTI rights in Poland, and the ones that we are counting most on is the one that could introduce registered partnerships in Poland. We hope that the court will say that not having anything when it comes to law that somehow regulates the same-sex couple's situation is against the convention, and that the Poland have to introduce something. But when will the judgment be passed? We don't really know, because we never know with the European Court of Human Rights when it's going to take place. Thank you.
Now, we're going into the question and answer part. Questions from the audience. Now, after the confinement, our spaces are narrowed down. What is expecting us? What are we expecting for the future, especially the confinement with respect to COVID-19? Perhaps Karolina will enlighten us with what's happening in Poland with respect to COVID-19 confinement and everything. What does the LGBTI plus world do face to face with these restrictions? What kind of impact? Karolina. No, let's start with you, Aylin, says the moderator. Well, I think one of the most important aspects, institutions in the coming period, is local government, because local government is doing a lot with respect to the pandemic, or at least they claim to do so, because if you are organizing a kind of assistance, you need to customize this according to different groups. When there is a person who is handicapped at home, they may have a different kind of need. Or if there's an LGBT person in a household, then, for instance, if there is a rise in violence because of the identity of the person, then that person should be taken to a safe house. Municipalities may be operational in moving these people out. Of course, that confrontation was very difficult at the beginning because all social spheres are shut down, bars are totally shut, and everyone was worried whether they were going to have the virus and whether there would be treatment. Well, online meetings or counseling, we have some facilities ourselves, and associations have been trying to adapt themselves, to the pandemic, and they formed different kinds of, counseling, psychological counseling, or some others specialized in material support. Perhaps in the new coming period, local government may come in. As associations, perhaps we should collaborate with them more, in particular the LGBTI plus people, and we should ask them to do that kind of work. And we should also make it heard that our associations have these hotlines for counseling, and perhaps we can solve many problems together. These associations are open to that kind of collaboration. So please write to us, please call us, and let us get rid of these problems altogether. Karolina, I interrupted you a moment ago. I'm sorry, says the moderator. Now, can we ask you what is happening in Poland? Are there restrictions? Is there a confinement to the home? Could you talk about that? Will there be new restrictions in the future? And how will that impact LGBTI people?
Thanks. There are restrictions. The biggest restrictions were in March when our government overreacted and actually brought a full lockdown. And but right now they are. I can say that my government is absolutely have no idea what to do with the COVID epidemic, and unfortunately the number of people getting infected is skyrocketing, and the healthcare system is absolutely preoccupied with COVID patients. And when it comes to the lockdown, I think they are afraid of the whole economy collapsing because this effect was visible during the first lockdown. So right now there are restrictions. There are restrictions about wearing a mask, about sanitizing your hands, about how many people can enter a particular shop or who can work in an office. So there is no lockdown, I would say, but there are many restrictions. A lot of shops are closed. The big galleries with shops are closed. Not a full lockdown, but many restrictions, and people are encouraged to stay at home. I would say that the first lockdown in March and in April has taken a very big toll on people. We have seen and we have received many voices from the community that they are actually afraid of staying at home because they have to stay at home with, for example, their homophobic family or with someone that is violent towards them, and they are afraid. But KPH, my association, is more of an advocacy organization, but we have some other associations that were establishing some phone call lines to help people that you can also call them and receive some support, also psychological support. We actually deal more with low support, but we have not seen an increase in people asking for legal help that I could tie somehow with COVID. I could tie it to the increase of homophobic hate speech and homophobic actions taken by the government, but I don't think we can somehow tie it with COVID. So right now we don't really have this huge lockdown. Who knows what will happen? The huge result was that all the equality marches did not happen this year. And the parade that was supposed to take place in June also did not happen. So this is one of the things that were most visible. And if I can say, I'm really hoping that the vaccine is found pretty soon, because really, with everything that's going on right now in Poland, with the number of people getting infected and the way that our government handles it, I believe we are facing another lockdown and a lot of consequences regarding people without help, without medical help. And this will affect all of us.
Another question that is of interest to Karolina. What is the attitude of psychological What is the attitude of psychologists and psychiatrists, the whole profession, to LGBTI plus in Poland, and what does the medical association do on this question? What is their attitude?
Okay. So you have to know that in Poland, being a psychologist doesn't mean that you have to actually finish studies, like being a a psychotherapist. So the people that deal with therapy, you don't really have to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So this is a very big issue right now in Poland. And so the psychologists and psychiatrists have their own associations, but they are informal ones. Like they cannot impose any bounding regulations to their members. So although most, if not all of those associations have issued statements saying that, for example, LGBT people are normal and they should not be discriminated against, and being trans person is normal, being a gay person is normal, it is okay, it is natural part of spectrum of human sexual orientation. They are not able to impose those these statements on their members. And I don't really think that they have a lot to say, that they are treated as an authority in the political discourse. So no one is asking doctors or psychologists or psychiatrists or any other doctors what they think about LGBT people, and it's not really a valid or respected point of view in the public debate.
Thank you, Karolina. But there are other questions with respect to Poland. People are curious to know. Again, a question on the membership of Poland in the EU. How does that impact Poland? Well, doesn't discrimination against LGBTI recede because of the laws of the European Union? Doesn't that help?
Unfortunately, the European Union has a very limited scope of what they can actually do when it comes to discrimination law. There is only a provision about that discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity is banned when it comes to labor law or the workplace, basically. So this is the only piece of legislation actually that in Poland we have written that discrimination against based on sexual orientation or gender identity is forbidden. It is in our labor code. But in other areas, we do not have such legislation. And in the strategy that I have talked previously, the Commission is actually planning to present more bans on discrimination on those grounds. However, to do it, they need to pass a directive, and to do it, they need to have all of the votes from the member states. So a veto from Poland equals no directive. So unfortunately, we are not really protected by the European law in this regard.
Thank you very much. Now, let's see if there are other questions from the audience. We're waiting for them. We do still have time. Well, this comparison between Poland and Turkey we have made, well, we see that there are very striking similarities, but then Poland is a country with a Catholic majority, Turkey is a country with a Muslim majority, but then These are countries where conservatives are very strong. But is it the rank and file of the people that make the question, that bring the question of the LGBTI on the agenda, or is it politics, really? Is it perhaps the political cadre that caused this problem? Aylime, let's start with you. And then because Karolina spoke a lot, so let's have her rest a bit and you speak first. Oh, I wasn't expecting this, so I'm a bit worried. Well, I don't think these are really independent. These two factors are independent from each other. Well, the population at large and politics do not move independently of each other. They are in interaction. Let me say the following. On the one hand, there is a difference. For instance, the population at large. Let's say your neighbor or people in the supermarket or the people you meet in shops, etc. You have to differentiate between them and the politicians, of course. Well, a person may not like LGBTI people, but I don't care. They may not be, they may not like LGBTI people in general, but when a minister comes forward, or a prime minister or a president of the republic comes forth and talks against LGBTIs, now this becomes a whole discourse, because those sentences now, through a chain reaction, provoke hate crimes, and this is a different kind of process. So what the politicians say, one sentence emitted by that politician may lead someone to attack you, and because they will be protected. Well, if I attack this kind of person, probably law enforcement will protect me, and so will the judiciary. So this way, LGBTI murders are provoked. So let me say, in sum, I don't think there is a homophobia within society in an embedded manner, but this is really encouraged. There, with respect to biopolitical work, with respect to work concerning population, etc., this produces heteronormativity. There are institutions that generate heteronormativity, and the state really encourages this. But there are times, as in the first period of the AKP, Erdogan said homosexuals are our citizens as well, and they should not be discriminated against. So I see this kind of disequilibrium in Turkey. This disequilibrium perhaps will be helpful to us in the future. So there is an encouragement of hate speech, etc. On the other hand. Thank you. Karolina, let's turn to you. What do you say? Is it the population at large, or is it politics that's responsible? That's the problem.
I would definitely say politics. If you take into account some public opinion surveys, most of Polish people are, for example, for registered partnerships. They're still against, for example, adoptions or marriages, marriage equality, but they are still for people, LGBT people, to be able to register their partnerships, for example, which for me is an indicator that most of the Polish people are not really that homophobic as our politics think. For me, this anti-LGBT rhetoric is just a political tool. This kind of conservative politicians, they somehow need an enemy. They always need an enemy that they can point everything towards. They need a scapegoat that they can blame for everything that is happening. When you don't really know how to resolve social crises, when you don't really know what to do with the environmental crisis, when you don't really know how to prevent people from losing their jobs, you have to somehow incite something more. And what would be more beautiful than some hatred against other group of people, and more useful than that. Unfortunately, I believe that those conservative politicians just use LGBT people as a tool to distract from the things that they are actually doing and failing at doing. And they are doing it also to somehow unite people with them, to create an enemy that the people can be united against, and just to distract people from it. But of course, this results in more homophobia on the streets, unfortunately, because when you see that your priest, that your politician, that MPs, your president is homophobic, that he makes homophobic statements, that is diminishing LGBT people, then you are more inclined to do so as well, because you hear that it is possible, you can do it. And when you hear that LGBT people are, they are not your family, they are not part of your citizen, they are not citizens of Poland, they are not, you can see them, they are just this kind of a thing, this monster hanging around and full of hatred and planning to destroy your family, then I believe it is very easy to blame LGBT people for everything.
And other questions for you, Karolina. In Poland, do bar associations have commissions with respect to the question of LGBTI, and what is the position of lawyers in general? Another question that concerns health professionals. Aren't health professionals supposed to comply with the directives of the World Health Organization and the American Psychological Association? In particular, first, the bar associations, do they have commissions, and what is the position of lawyers in general with respect to the question of LGBTI+? That's the first question.
I don't think that lawyers in general have any unanimous position on this, because there are there are two main bar associations in Poland, one with advocates and one with attorneys at law. And in those associations, it is like more impact is put on neutrality and not being active in political context, and not really raising voice or concern about political issues. And unfortunately, sometimes the hateful rhetoric is regarded as a political issue. My local bar association, the Warsaw District Bar Association, have issued statements condemning the hateful rhetoric, and also some other bar association did as well. However, you have to remember that we have this association called Ordo Iuris, the Foundation for something. Ordo Iuris, mainly, we call it Ordo Iuris. This is an association that is a legal association. Like people that work there are lawyers, are advocates, and they are like as far right-wing as you can possibly imagine, and they are the ones that are actively involved in all of the hateful rhetoric that is happening right now. They are the ones that are telling a lot of homophobic things disguised as neutral language, disguised as a law language. But you have to just understand that, like, the associations, maybe they issue some statements, but again, you cannot say that all the lawyers in general in Poland are like very opposed to the hateful rhetoric, because a lot of them are unfortunately extremely conservative. And when it comes to health professionals, they have to comply with the science-based medicine, basically. But what is science-based medicine is not, we don't really have any law that says that you have to comply with the WHO directives. And when it comes to sexual education, for example, the WHO standards are regarded by the conservative as something like closely to something, I don't know, Satan's Bible, something demonic, because a lot of conservative politicians are, and also Ordo Iuris, for example, are extremely opposed to sexual education based on WHO standards. And they say that the standards are supposed to teach young children how to masturbate and lots of other incredibly stupid things. So no, we don't really have something like you have to comply with the WHO directives. You have to comply with what is right now known, what is now science-based medicine. But what it is, you have to ask the doctors and the medical professionals, I guess.
Then, in the academic world, what is the position of LGBTI in the academic world? Is there any work done? Is there any work done by LGBTI? And is there any censorship on that work, on that research work?
No, I don't think there is a censorship. I don't really think we can say that there is a censorship. I would say that most of the academic world somehow engaged in condemning the homophobic hate speech from the politicians, but and there are also gender studies, for example, in Poland. There are science circles that are, we have some initiatives like Queer UW that is working at Warsaw University. We have social gatherings at Jagiellonian University. So I believe that there is a pluralistic, there are a lot of pluralistic opinions in the academic world. And there are also, of course, homophobic statements made there by the academics themselves. But this is just part of the pluralistic world of academia in Poland.
Thank you very much, Karolina. I would like to thank both guests. I have learned a lot. Speaking in my own name, it was really enlightening, and this was a debate that had to be carried out, and we did it at the right time. I would also like to thank the audience, and I would like to also thank the organizers, the Memory Center, the Association for Monitoring Human Equal Rights, and the Dutch Helsinki group. You can always watch this from on YouTube and in the social media accounts of these associations. Thank you very much to all the participants and our panelists. Thank you very much.